The first clue that something was off came in the form of a bright pink envelope taped to my front door. Big, bold letters screamed, "Final Notice." I yanked it down, muttering under my breath. I'm Gavin Summers, and if there's one thing I hate more than cold coffee, it's the HOA in my neighborhood. Especially Tiffany Farnell, the queen of the HOA, who spent more time patrolling lawns than living her own life. I ripped the envelope open and stared at the paper inside. Violation, unauthorized lawn decoration. Fine, $300. Signature of acknowledgement, Gavin Summers. My stomach twisted. I never signed anything. I didn't even own any decorations. My lawn was as plain as a slice of white bread. I marched straight over to the HOA office, a cramped little room stuffed inside the community center, and found Tiffany behind the desk, her blonde bob practically vibrating with self-importance. "Hey, Tiffany," I said, holding up the letter. "What's this about?" She didn't even look up from her laptop. "You signed the notice last week, Gavin. It's official. You have until Friday to pay." "I didn't sign anything," I snapped. She finally lifted her beady little eyes to mine. "Well, we have your signature on file. Maybe you forgot." "No," I said, voice tight. "I didn't forget. I never signed anything." Tiffany's lips curled into a smug little grin. "If you want to contest it, you'll have to bring it up at the next board meeting. Until then, the fine stands." I left before I said something that would get me in real trouble. But as I walked home, my mind was already racing. Something didn't add up. Tiffany had always been a thorn in everyone's side, handing out ridiculous fines for things like overly bright porch lights and aggressive gnome placement. But faking a signature, that was a new low even for her. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I had an idea, and it was going to wipe that smug look off her face for good. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the so-called fine with a cup of black coffee growing cold by my elbow. My brain churned through every option. Arguing with Tiffany at the next board meeting would be useless. She controlled the narrative there. I needed something irrefutable, something that couldn't be swept under the rug with one of her fake smiles and phony policies. That's when the idea hit me. Handwriting analysis. I pulled out my phone and started calling around. After a few dead ends, I found a forensic handwriting expert named Dr. Lena Halliday. She had testified in court cases and had a reputation for being thorough. I booked an appointment for that afternoon and made copies of the document, along with several examples of my real signature from mortgage papers, my driver's license renewal, and even a few old checks. When I arrived at her immaculate office, Dr. Halliday greeted me with a firm handshake and serious blue eyes that missed nothing. She listened carefully as I explained the situation, nodding once before spreading the documents across her glass-topped desk. "I'll need a few hours," she said, adjusting her glasses, "but from a first glance, that signature on the fine looks off." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since this whole mess started. I left her office feeling like I had finally found a crack in Tiffany's armor. By the time I got home, my neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, was waving me over from his porch. "Gavin," he said, voice low, "you're not the only one. They fined me for a fence violation last month. Claimed I signed an agreement. I never saw anything." My gut tightened. "Did you fight it?" He shook his head. "Didn't know how. They threatened to put a lien on my house if I didn't pay." That explained why everyone kept their heads down around here. Fear. Tiffany and her cronies had weaponized it, but fear wasn't my style. Not anymore. 2 days later, Dr. Halliday called. "It's not just unlikely that you signed that document," she said. "It's impossible. The slant, the pressure patterns, letter formations all wrong. I'd stake my professional reputation on it." "Can you put that in a report?" I asked, already grabbing my keys. "You'll have it in an hour. Also, if you're planning to press charges, I'll testify." My heart pounded. This was bigger than a petty fine now. Forgery was a felony. I took the report straight to Officer Patel at the local precinct. I knew him from a few neighborhood events. He had a no-nonsense attitude and a deep dislike for bullies. After reading Dr. Halliday's report, Officer Patel sat back and whistled under his breath. "Forgery," he said. "Plus, if she's using this to collect fines, that's fraud, possibly racketeering if there's a pattern." I leaned forward. "There is a pattern," he nodded once. "I'll need you to make an official statement." After that, we'll open an investigation. By the time I left the station, adrenaline was buzzing through my veins. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was going to tear down the whole rotten structure Tiffany had built. Over the next week, Officer Patel and a couple of plainclothes detectives quietly collected evidence. They interviewed Mr. Alvarez, a few other neighbors who had similar stories, and even the HOA's treasurer, who looked like he was ready to fold under the slightest pressure. Apparently, Tiffany had been strong-arming the board members, keeping them in line with threats of fabricated violations and public embarrassment. The night they arrested her will be burned into my memory forever. It was during the monthly HOA meeting inside the stuffy, over-decorated community center. Tiffany was standing at the podium, lecturing a room full of exhausted residents about upholding neighborhood standards when the double doors swung open. Officer Patel and two deputies walked in, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Tiffany faltered, her voice catching mid-sentence. She tried to recover, clearing her throat and adjusting her pearl necklace, but the color drained from her face when Patel spoke. "Miss Farnell, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and multiple counts of extortion." Gasps echoed through the room. Chairs scraped back. Someone dropped a coffee cup. Tiffany sputtered, "There must be some mistake. I'm the president of this community." Patel didn't blink. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The deputies cuffed her right there in front of everyone. She shrieked about conspiracies and jealous neighbors as they led her out, but no one moved to help her. No one said a word. As the doors swung shut behind them, the room sat in stunned silence. Then Mr. Alvarez stood up and clapped. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't loud or raucous, just steady, relieved applause. The board dissolved Tiffany's presidency within 24 hours. They appointed an interim president, a retired firefighter named Lynn, who had never been involved with the old guard's antics. She called an emergency meeting and promised transparency, fairness, and most importantly, a full audit of the HOA's finances. Meanwhile, Tiffany's arrest made the local news. Turns out she was facing serious charges enough to put her behind bars for years. Her mugshot, featuring her perfectly coiffed hair flattened against the booking wall, became an instant meme among the residents. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt light. People started chatting outside again. Kids rode their bikes without getting harassed about excessive noise. Mr. Alvarez even threw a block party, complete with a taco truck and a local band. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching neighbors laugh and mingle, Lynn walked over with 2 cold beers. She handed me one and leaned against the railing. "You started all this, you know," she said, nodding toward the lively street. I shrugged. "Just got tired of letting bullies win." She smiled. "Well, thanks to you, we're cleaning house, and if you're interested, we could use someone like you on the new board." I laughed, shaking my head. I think I've had enough HOA politics for one lifetime, but deep down I was proud. Not just because I had cleared my name, but because I had helped give the neighborhood its soul back. Tiffany had ruled with fear, but once we stood up to her, she crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. And now, for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. The aftermath of Tiffany's arrest sent shockwaves beyond our neighborhood. Within days, news vans were parked near the entrance, their satellite dishes spinning like vultures over a fresh kill. Reporters hounded anyone stepping outside, eager for dirt on the HOA queenpin who had finally been dethroned. I kept my head down, declining every interview request. I wasn't looking for fame. I just wanted normalcy, but normalcy wasn't ready to come back yet. 2 weeks after Tiffany was cuffed, Officer Patel showed up at my door again, this time with a man in a dark gray suit standing beside him. Patel introduced him as Assistant District Attorney Marcus Yates. Yates wasted no time. "Mr. Summers, thanks for your help before. We're building a much larger case against Miss Farnell now. We could use your testimony." I nodded, feeling the weight of it settle on my shoulders. "Whatever you need." Yates tucked a folder under his arm. "We've uncovered some additional activities. It's worse than just forged fines." He didn't elaborate then, but I got the full picture a few days later, when I was called in to officially review the evidence they intended to present. Tiffany hadn't just been manufacturing fines, she had been diverting HOA funds into a private account for years. Tens of thousands of dollars, siphoned off under fake maintenance projects and non-existent landscaping contracts. She had even created shell companies, complete with fake invoices, to cover her tracks. The community center's roof. It was supposed to have been replaced 2 years ago. Tiffany had paid a company called Evergreen Projects to do it. Only Evergreen Projects didn't exist outside a P.O. box registered under her cousin's name. As the scope of her crimes widened, so did the list of charges: embezzlement, money laundering, wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was trying to patch itself together. Lynn organized volunteer days to repaint the battered playground equipment and replant the dead flower beds that Tiffany had neglected while pocketing the beautification budget. One evening, Lynn caught me as I was hauling a wheelbarrow full of mulch toward the park entrance. "You're going to be a key witness," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "You nervous?" I shrugged, setting down the wheelbarrow. "Nervous? No. Angry? Definitely." She leaned against the fence, her face serious. "You should know, her attorney's already trying to spin this, claiming she was pressured by the board and misunderstood the scope of her authority. They're going to paint her as a martyr." I shook my head in disbelief. "There's no misunderstanding stealing money. Just be ready," Lynn said. "They're going to try to rattle you." I spent the next few weeks preparing with Yates. He was sharp, methodical, and didn't sugarcoat anything. We walked through every document, every signature, every conversation I had ever had with Tiffany related to HOA matters. "The defense will attack your credibility," Yates said during one session, sliding a pad of notes toward me. "They'll suggest you had a personal vendetta." I leaned back in the stiff plastic chair, crossing my arms. They can suggest whatever they want. The truth's not going to change. The trial date arrived faster than I expected. The courthouse was an imposing old building, all gray stone and iron railings. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. Tiffany sat at the defendant's table, wearing a navy blue dress and a pinched expression. Her lawyer, a slick-looking man with a permanent tan, whispered furiously in her ear as the judge entered the room. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand, my palms dry but my heart hammering against my ribs. Yates started with the basics, walking me through how I received the fake fine and how I knew it wasn't my signature. He introduced Dr. Halliday's forensic report as evidence, along with a side-by-side display of my authentic signatures and the forged one. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination, his voice oily smooth. "Mr. Summers," he began, "would you describe yourself as someone who gets along with authority figures?" I raised an eyebrow. "I get along fine with honest ones." A few muffled chuckles rippled through the courtroom. The attorney pressed on. "Isn't it true you had a disagreement with Miss Farnell at a block party 2 years ago regarding lawn maintenance policies?" I kept my tone even. "She tried to fine my neighbor for having a single dandelion. I told her it was ridiculous. That wasn't a disagreement." "That was common sense." He frowned, flipping through his notes. "Would you say you harbor resentment against HOA leadership?" "I resent corruption," I said calmly, "not leadership." The judge gave a slight nod, as if approving the distinction when Dr. Halliday took the stand next. Her testimony was clinical and devastating. She broke down every inconsistency in the forged signature, explaining the science behind her findings without a hint of bias. The likelihood of Mr. Summers having naturally produced this signature, she concluded, is statistically negligible. By the time Yates presented the financial evidence, the fake companies, the wire transfers, the falsified invoices, the weight of it was crushing. Tiffany's defense crumbled under the mountain of proof. After a tense deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. "Miss Farnell, you abused a position of trust for personal gain, undermined a community, and violated the law in numerous and deliberate ways. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 8. Tiffany didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just sat there, staring blankly ahead as the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, her once immaculately curated image shattered beyond repair. Outside the courthouse, the neighborhood had gathered, lining the steps with handmade signs that said things like "Justice for Willow Creek" and "No More Tyrants." Mr. Alvarez spotted me near the bottom of the stairs and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Gavin," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You gave us our home back." I nodded, too overwhelmed for words. Lynn stepped up beside us, holding a manila folder. "We're holding a special election next Saturday," she said. "New board, new bylaws, real transparency this time." I looked at the crowd cheering and hugging and laughing, kids weaving between adults with the kind of innocence that can only exist when the shadow of fear has lifted. Maybe it wasn't just about normalcy. Maybe it was about building something stronger than before. And this time, we were doing it together. The weeks after the trial moved like a slow, healing tide. Without Tiffany's iron-fisted control, our neighborhood gradually started to feel less like a prison and more like a real community. The special election Lynn had organized was held on a bright Saturday morning in the community center's courtyard, the same place where Tiffany had once barked orders and handed out fines like Halloween candy. I watched from under a pop-up tent as families gathered around folding tables, casting their votes. There were no whispers of intimidation, no watchful committee members hovering over ballots, just neighbors, finally free to choose who they trusted. After the votes were counted, Lynn officially became president, winning by a landslide. She immediately announced a plan for public monthly meetings, open financial records, and a full reevaluation of every HOA policy. The idea of residents actually having a voice again sparked something hopeful in all of us. But there was one last piece of unfinished business that couldn't be ignored. A few days after the election, Officer Patel called me. His tone was different this time, heavier. "We uncovered something else in Tiffany's old files," he said. "Something you need to see." When I arrived at the station, Patel led me into a small conference room where a battered cardboard box sat on the table. Inside were dozens of manila folders, some marked with names I recognized, neighbors who had sold their homes in the last few years under suspicious circumstances. Patel pulled out one of the folders and laid the contents in front of me, a forged lien notice. A fake late fee accumulating thousands of dollars in unpaid dues. Threatening letters with Tiffany's signature at the bottom, warning homeowners that they would be taken to court if they didn't comply. "She forced them out," I said, my voice low. "That's what it looks like," Patel confirmed. "She created fake debts, scared them into selling, and then either bought the properties herself through shell buyers or arranged sweetheart sales to investors she was connected with." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it. "How many families?" "At least 15, he said grimly. "And the worst part, some of those homes were flipped for massive profits. She made a fortune. It wasn't just about greed anymore. Tiffany had systematically destroyed lives for personal gain. The DA's office immediately filed new charges against her. This time, the case wasn't just about forgery and fraud. It was about criminal conspiracy, grand larceny, and housing fraud. She was transferred to a higher security facility to await a second trial. Meanwhile, Lynn and the new board organized a town hall meeting to discuss how the HOA could help the families who had been wronged. They invited any former residents who had been pushed out to come forward, promising pro bono legal aid and financial restitution funded by the seizure of Tiffany's assets. At the meeting, I sat in the back and watched as people stood up, one by one, to tell their stories. Mrs. Henderson, a retired schoolteacher, described how she had been threatened with foreclosure over a supposed missing dues payment that never existed. The Morales family shared how they had been forced to sell their home for a fraction of its worth after being buried under fake fines. Each story lit a fire in the room. When Lynn took the microphone, her voice was steady. "We can't change what happened," she said, "but we can make it right. We're offering full legal support to anyone impacted, and moving forward, every financial decision will be subject to community vote." The applause that followed wasn't loud or raucous. It was solid, unbreakable. After the meeting, Lynn found me outside near the courtyard fountain, where the evening air was cool and the stars were starting to appear. "Gavin," she said, sitting beside me on the stone ledge, "we couldn't have done this without you." I shook my head. It wasn't just me, it was everyone who decided enough was enough. She smiled, tired but genuine. "Still, you were the first to stand up." Before I could answer, Mr. Alvarez approached with a clipboard. "We're putting together a proposal," he said. "Community Oversight Committee, no more unchecked power." I signed without hesitation. Weeks turned into months. The second trial against Tiffany was swift. With overwhelming evidence and multiple victims willing to testify, the jury took less than a day to find her guilty again. This time, the judge handed down a 30-year sentence, with no chance of parole for at least 25. Her empire of fear had crumbled into dust. In the aftermath, property values in the neighborhood stabilized. Families who had left started visiting again, some even moving back. Block parties, farmers markets, and movie nights became regular events at the community park, where laughter replaced the constant tension that had once hung in the air. I focused on my workshop, finally finishing the custom furniture projects I had put off for too long. Business picked up too. Word spread fast that I was the guy who had helped take down a corrupt HOA, and people liked supporting someone who had fought for the little guy. One evening, as I was sanding down the edge of a new oak dining table, I heard a knock at the open garage door. It was Mr. Alvarez again, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Thought you could use a break," he said, handing me one. I set down the sander and took a sip. Strong, just the way I liked it. "You thinking about joining the board officially?" he asked. I chuckled. "I think I'm better as a watchdog." He nodded, understanding. "Good. We need people like that too." As he walked off into the twilight, I leaned against the workbench and looked around. The streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over front lawns and driveways where kids played and neighbors chatted without fear. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. No more pink envelopes. No more threats taped to doors. No more fake signatures or whispered warnings. Just a neighborhood that had learned the hard way that when good people stand together, even the worst tyrants can be brought down. And as far as I was concerned, that was the real victory.